Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So, in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2011 British sci-fi horror comedy Attack the Block, as directed by Joe Cornish. So, now, this one may just have slipped underneath quite a few people's radar. For one, it didn't take an impressive box office when it was released, and I believe it had rather a limited release, and for the other, just the title probably puts people off and kind of places it into a niche category for most. With other British horror comedies such as 2004's Shaun of the Dead being more recognised and universal, it is easy for Attack the Block to kind of get overlooked. It is actually quite an intriguing entry into the genre and quite stylishly executed. An overlooked and underrated gem, in my opinion. And it indeed stars a few unknowns, people that were unknown at the time of its release, who actually then went on to star in some of the world's biggest franchises. So even on that alone, it's worth a watch. The movie sees a gang of teenagers on a fictional housing estate in London, The Block. It is suggested it's around the area of Brixton in the movie, but it is designed to be fairly nondescript. It could be anywhere in London, but it's set during bonfire night, and it sees our would-be heroes, the gang if you like, trying to fight off a horde of ferocious invading aliens. Earlier in the evening, they had actually mugged a passerby, Samantha Adams, as played by Jodie Whittaker, and had actually managed to later kill the first alien to land. But soon, they then find out that worse is yet to come, with the aliens that follow being bigger, meaner, and relentless in their pursuit of our gang of would-be hoodlums. Seeking refuge in the block, amongst the maze of concrete pathways and high-rise buildings, their fortress being the Wyndham Tower in which they live, the gang launch an all-out assault on our unsuspecting invaders. So, the plot is simple in most respects. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. It doesn't try to extend beyond its very simple premise, and instead concentrates on delivering us a very solid horror come sci-fi movie with some great characters and fantastic dialogue with a fairly decent pacing to match. Whereas a film like Shaun of the Dead, for instance, opts for more visual comedy at times, this one actually relies on its dialogue to add comedy. There are no direct visual gags, and the pop culture references are very few and far between. It does include one for Pokemon, which is simply excellent. But all of these are wrapped up in the clever use of what's known as multicultural London English, which the best way to describe it would be a dialect which has kind of developed over time, popular with London's youths, which is kind of derived from a number of different cultures. I do hesitate to use the word slang, as that sounds very demeaning, but it is perhaps what most people would know this as. But just because perhaps such dialect is often tied hand in hand with gangs and violence, that isn't always the case, and instead it is a subculture, which you actually think about when you think about it, has kind of actually embraced diversity in language. The way the film actually embraces this dialect is fantastic, which is quite interesting, as when such dialect is often used, it can be either quite condescending, used directly for cheap gags at the culture's or the area's expense, or just used in kind of stupid ways that make no sense at all. That just isn't the case here, and although quite a lot of the words kind of went over my head, I did get most of them through the contextual settings of each of the scenes, which are very visually displayed. And that was yet another great example of how coherent the film actually is. The comedy is far more subtle in this way and doesn't use the language at anybody's expense. The film is actually a very smart and very observant film, a very take on the genre, with a lot of focus on the characters and altering our perceptions and feelings towards them as we actually progress through the movie. It does identify with some elements of London gang culture, choosing to centre around the lives of young Londoners and how they are treated, to some extent, by the authorities and the people living in that area. And basically kind of looks at the lack of opportunities and the deprived living conditions many of them face that turn them towards the life of crime in gangs. And the film does actually depict this through 3 levels. Those that, like at the ages of 7 and 10, that aspire to be like their older idols, the 14 to 16-year-olds that are just kind of starting in street crime, and how easily they are then enticed into dealing drugs and larger crimes in general by other elements in the society. The movie does bring us some very vibrant, larger-than-life characters, mostly from unknown actors, like I said, at the time of its release. And in this, I believe this is actually one of its strongest assets. All the characters are fairly well developed throughout, and I can't think of any one character that I didn't like overall for the role that they actually played, or that kind of let the side down. The film does actually star John Boyega as Moses, who is the leader of our gang of youths, you would say, in his very first theatrical role. Of course, Boyega would then actually go on to play Finn in the Star Wars sequels. And of course, let's not forget Jodie Whittaker, who I mentioned earlier, who would then go on to play the 13th and first female Doctor in the Doctor Who series. But both actually carry across some very strong performances throughout this movie. And indeed, the film actually also features Nick Frost as Ron, a drug dealer who was living in the penthouse of the Wyndham building, who I would imagine was added to the film to act as kind of a draw for the movie. He wasn't needed, giving the other main cast members a chance to shine, which indeed they did. He wasn't overused, which was fantastic. With all of this that I have discussed so far, I will admit that I do like the conflict and the transition with the characters. So, don't get me wrong with what I'm about to say. I think all of that adds grit and an edge of realism to the proceedings that you don't often get. But what I didn't like is the glorification of the crime the youths committed. And although it isn't necessarily swept under the carpet, the film has become known for its reflection on how young teens, especially black teens, are treated by the police. Which is an absolutely great thing to highlight this. Absolutely. No, I'm not questioning that. But in this movie, they do actually commit a crime at knife point. They actually mug somebody. The police might actually incorrectly assume they have killed everybody. Moses is stood over a pile of dead bodies with a machete at one point. So go figure. But they correctly call him Moses for mugging Samantha at the beginning of the movie and for carrying a Class A drug. In this, the film does seem a little mixed in its messaging. I understand the need to have a stark transition from thug to hero. It's essential to the film. But the message would have been better served by not having them commit a crime at all, as it still fuels to some extent the stereotypes it's actually trying to counter. Which of course it does as it progresses, as we do actually feel more sympathy towards Samantha's original aggressors, with the introduction of an even higher street thug named High Hats, as played by Jermaine Hunter, who is the vision of what Moses and the rest of his gang initially aspire to be. Knowing the hard choices that kind of thrust upon them because of the path in life they have gone down and the company that they choose to keep. As brilliantly stated in the movie, in respect to this, they should have simply have gone home and played FIFA, bruv. It doesn't sound obviously right coming from me, but that's obviously in the film. All of this said, I have actually forgotten to discuss the horror elements of the movie. These again are simply superb. It's not real on the edge of your seat kind of stuff, but it is very entertaining nonetheless. At its heart, it's a creature feature, utilising some classic physical effects. The aliens themselves are brilliant and terrifying in their own way. Again, not to the extent of like the H.R. Geiger aliens from the Alien series, but enough for what the film is. You can at times see the creatures for what they are, people in suits. But for me, I actually enjoyed the more basic elements that they've used in this movie. It doesn't look hammy, and they have tried to give their creations a bit of a unique element, and a reason for being that simply isn't a complete rehash and a whole host of CGI creatures. And in this, the film does deserve some respect and admiration in my book. There are some CGI effects used, mostly post-filming, which serve to provide the finish to the creatures. Namely, fur that is literally so black, no light can escape, making them near invisible at times. And their teeth, which have an eerie, luminescent blue glow, which at times is the only part of them that you see before succumbing to the bite. They are not so overused as to spoil the kind of the overall aesthetics of the movie and its gritty kind of urban cinematography. And finally, to finish, the music, the topping to the cake, if you like. Composed by Basement Jaxx and Stephen Price, it's brilliant. It has a real kind of catchy urban feel, very much like the rest of the movie, and builds up the suspense at the start brilliantly. You can really feel the blood kind of pumping in the film's antagonists, come protagonists, as they kind of take their alien trophy to the block, which sets the scene very nicely for what is about to unfold. The score offers a sense of gritty wonder as we approach the Wyndham Tower, providing an excellent menacing feel for the tower block itself. So I would say, don't be put off by the title. Don't be put off by the use of a different dialect. It is a fantastic creature feature and brings back some good old school special effects, mixed with some post-filming touch-ups that brings some truly terrifying creatures to the screen. The whole ensemble is pretty well crafted and makes for quite an enjoyable riot. It is a pretty decent all-round movie with some great effects, an excellent use of a local dialect, and an amazing stepping stone in the career of a number of actors who went on to become recognised around the world. Definitely somewhat of an overlooked gem. This movie is certainly worth a visit. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Most of all, though, we have loved having you. Thank you very much for visiting SciFirst MovieTalk. We'd love to have you back. And in that, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.